Hey guys, this is the first lecture for the nervous system. In this one I'm just going to sort of go through some of the various classifications of the nervous system, both structural and functional. So first we have the three major functions of the nervous system. These are briefly just sensory input, integration, and motor output. There are definitions here for you, but I'm going to move to the next picture before I talk about them. So here is kind of a visual representation of all of the definitions. So we have sensory input being the nerve pathways that are taking information from your sensory receptors, in this case the eyes of the person looking at the water, to the brain. Notice the arrow, sensory is always going to go inwards towards the brain. That's going to be a constant. Integration is shown here as this little green neuron, and let's come back to that in just a second. I want to jump over to the motor output first. Motor output is this red neuron, and motor output is the signal coming out from the brain. So in this case, the motor output is the signal leaving the brain and reaching the effector, which is a muscle in the arm, so that the person can lift the water to drink it. Again, look at the direction of the arrows. Motor output is going away from the brain. And so then the integration makes a little bit more sense. If we look at the sensory input and the motor output, integration is what sort of links those two things together. So it's processing the sensory input and facilitating the motor output, or sort of deciding what the motor output is going to be. This picture just shows a similar diagram, and we can see here is our central nervous system. So that's going to be basically the brain and spinal cord. We have signals coming from our external environment, and those signals are detected by our sensory neurons and taken in towards the central nervous system. I put this picture down here. We have just some examples of external environmental stimuli. So things you hear, smell, taste, see, touch would be examples of external environment. And then the central nervous system, which is processing that information, the next step will be that information, or the pathway of the motor neurons is going to leave the central nervous system and go to some effector that will respond to the external stimulus. On the other side here, we can see that the same thing happens with the internal environment. So internal body conditions are constantly regulated. We refer to that as homeostasis. I've put the picture down here showing that information is coming from all of your internal organs, and those sensory neurons that are monitoring your internal environment send that information in towards the CNS. Notice that the sensory up top, the arrows are always going inwards, and then we've got the motor neurons always sending information out away from the CNS, always out towards an effector. This picture just sort of shows the main two structural divisions of the nervous system. So we've got the central nervous system and the peripheral. Central is just brain and spinal cord. These are going to be the organs that are found in the dorsal body cavity, so in the skull and in the vertebral column. The peripheral nervous system is all of these nerves that leave the spinal cord, leave the brain, and travel to the rest of the muscles in the body. Again, this picture just sort of shows the central nervous system, so brain and spine. And if we think about the picture, I'm just going to jump back for a second. If we think about this picture here with the three major functions of the nervous system, integration is the primary function of the central nervous system. So the central nervous system is involved in integration. It's taking in sensory information and deciding what the motor output is going to be. The peripheral nervous system is all of these paired nerves coming from the spinal cord. Those would be called spinal nerves, and coming from the brain, those are the cranial nerves. This is a very cool picture. This is just a human that's been dissected, and all of the nerves have been taken away from the muscle and the glands, just so you can see how many there are and how highly branched they are, traveling all over the body to connect all of the effectors, all of the muscles and glands of the body to the central nervous system. So we can functionally divide up the peripheral nervous system. There are some major functions of the PNS. And again, I'm going to go back to an earlier picture. And we can see that sensory input and motor output are the things that are going to be the job of the central nervous system. So, I'm sorry, the job of the peripheral nervous system. So getting information in towards the brain and then carrying information out away from the brain. The sensory division is also known as the afferent division, and afferent just means that the information is going in towards something. It's kind of a generic term. In this case, it's going in towards the brain. This division carries impulses from the sensory receptors, so things like sense organs, eyes, ears, mouth, nose, touch receptors, all of the receptors that are monitoring your internal environment, carries that in towards the CNS. Then the motor division is efferent, meaning that it's being carried away from the brain. This is going to be all of the messages, all of the impulses going from the central nervous system out to the body, out to the effectors of the body. That's going to be muscles and glands. Okay, so the motor or efferent division, I want you to think back. This is all of the stuff coming out from the brain. Think back to that picture of the guy looking at the water glass. Everything coming out from the brain, controlling the response of your body. And we can sort of break that down because the efferent division is going to have two different main types of effectors that it sends information to. There will be voluntary effectors and involuntary effectors. So in other words, the brain will be determining, or the brain will be directing your voluntary skeletal muscles to react to stimuli, and that's going to be known as the somatic nervous system. Anytime the effector is a skeletal muscle, because remember, skeletal muscles are voluntary. And then your brain also is going to be having information sent to your smooth and cardiac muscles, and these are involuntary. So the involuntary effectors are part of the autonomic nervous system. This is going to include glands. If you think about trying to control your salivary gland or control your sweat glands, those are involuntary as well. So your brain is controlling them, and it's involuntary. The involuntary division, this autonomic nervous system, is then further divided up into two categories, the sympathetic and the parasympathetic. And we'll talk about those more in just a second. This is a really good diagram. Make sure you look this over, be able to draw this from scratch. Don't worry about all of the definitions and everything, but if you can just do the headings, you're in good shape. You've got the gist of this lecture. So anyway, we've been talking mostly about the peripheral nervous system, and we said that there are sensory neurons, everything going into the brain, and then there are motor neurons, everything coming out from the brain. The motor neurons, some of them are traveling to voluntary muscles, and so that's going to be the somatic nervous system. Some of them are traveling to involuntary muscles, and that's the autonomic nervous system. Now, the autonomic has two main branches, depending sort of what the external environment, what the external stimuli are. So we've got the sympathetic division. This is commonly referred to as the fight or flight response. So this is preparing the body for stress or for exerting energy. And then the opposite of that, the flip side, is the parasympathetic division, which calms the body down. The way we sort of remember fight or flight for the sympathetic division, this one gives you a little device here too. So rest and rumination, to sit and kind of think about life, I don't know, but just to sort of not be under stressful conditions. This picture shows in detail the difference between what the sympathetic division of the autonomic nervous system does and what the parasympathetic does. I've put these little sidebars here, so if you remember that sympathetic is fight or flight, you can read through this list of responses of the effectors that are triggered by the sympathetic nervous system. In general, you're going to find that your body is trying to increase the amount of oxygen and energy getting to your muscles, and it's also going to be shutting down things like the digestion of food or the production of urine. So you're not really worried about eating or going to the bathroom at a time when you are worried about fighting or fleeing. On the parasympathetic side, rest and rumination on the last page, I put rest and digest. I kind of like that one better. And what we can see here is that all of these things are going to lead you towards digesting your food, using less oxygen, using less energy, just kind of slowing down and relaxing. When you are not fighting or fleeing, that's a good time to have a meal, go to the bathroom. So rest and digest is all the stuff that you are going to be doing when you're not under a high stress situation. I put this little parachute guy here, and that is a little trick I just learned yesterday. And if you think about the parasympathetic and you think about a parachute, the parachute slows you down when you're falling. The parasympathetic division calms you down and does all of these involuntary responses that are going to be things you want to be doing when you're resting. Okay, that is it for this first lecture. I hope that was helpful, and there will be another one shortly on the structure of neurons.